Okay, welcome, Mr. Craig. Thank you for joining us once more.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and please call me Phil. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Phil. So the Cape Independence. So this podcast will be on that. Okay, well, this episode will be on that. Just so you know, Let's Talk podcast is a recently new podcast opened by a very young group of people. And it's all about social issues. And since we are on, political season, we thought, why not open like a political segment, try to get people aware of politics, young people aware of politics. We had like many representatives from many different political parties. And your party is interesting party as well, recently new. And we thought, why not?
Yeah.
You know? So like, yes,
No, well,
thank
look, fantastic. And I love it too. And what a great opportunity, because I mean, logically speaking, you would feel there's going to be some friction between your community and our party, and therefore that's almost like the perfect opportunity to have a discussion. So, because I think as soon as we understand each other better, we often
yes.
find out that, actually we've got far more in common than we think.
So yes, because like it's not really right to make assumptions all the time. It's good to talk. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so the Cape.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
sorry.
you go first. No,
Oh,
you go. You go. Sorry.
okay. So the Cape Independence is a political party and it seeks independence of the Western Cape province. And is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the look, there's an organisation which I founded called the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, or the CIAG, which has been around for a few years. We launched this political party out of that organisation, the Referendum Party, which we launched in November. And yes, we're calling for a referendum of Western Cape voters to decide whether they want the Western Cape to become a separate country away from South Africa.
Oh, okay. I see. I see. So, okay. So into the interview, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, Phil. As you probably tell from the accent, was originally born in the UK. I came to South Africa in 2004. Fell in love with a South African, married, became South African myself. This is my adopted country, and I love it dearly. Had children here. My children are South African, and no. So ultimately, that's my spot. I'm here. I'm here for keeps. People often say, no, I don't work for MI6. No, I don't have property in the UK. Everything I have here, I earn my money in rand, and I have the same challenges as everybody else. Ultimately, I got involved in politics as an ordinary person who was just getting frustrated with South Africa, which just seemed to be making all of the wrong decisions. And ultimately, I saw the future for my children who are young, thinking, well, gosh, what future are they going to have? And there's a better option here. And ultimately, at some point you have to sort of step in as citizens and
Mhm.
and create the future you want for yourself.
Okay. So, like, can you tell us the difference, if there is a difference, between the Referendum Party and the Cape Independence?
Well, Cape Independence is a generic term, so perhaps you're meaning something else by it to what I am. So Cape Independence is like a generic term in terms of it's the movement, and there are lots of
Oh,
different organisations in that movement. It's not just one organisation. So the Referendum Party, of which I'm the leader, is a political party that's been formed to contest these elections. But I'm also the co-founder of an organisation called the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. So the Cape Independence Advocacy Group was a lobby group that worked and continues to work hard to put pressure on other political parties.
mhm.
Ultimately, we got as far as we could, and we formed the Referendum Party because we want to pressurize. Look, in South Africa, to have independence, for the Western Cape to become independent, we have to have a referendum in accordance with the South African Constitution. The only person who can call that referendum is the Western Cape Premier, and obviously the Western Cape Premier is a DA Premier, is still going to be a DA Premier after 2024. We've tried to negotiate that with the DA, and in fact we did. I personally negotiated with DA leader John Steenhuisen that he would call a referendum which included a question in Cape independence, but ultimately they reneged on that agreement, and that's why we formed a political party to try and put pressure on them to hold the referendum, to ask the Western Cape people, do they want independence or not?
Oh, so many people believe that it is racially motivated. Is that the case?
No, it's not, but I think you're absolutely right. Many people do believe it's racially motivated, and I have come got to the point where I just accept being called racist on a daily basis. And I obviously know who I am. I know what I stand for, and I always say, look, I'll answer to God and my own conscience. It absolutely isn't racially motivated, unfortunately. And I think where it becomes difficult is there's obviously a correlation in South Africa between people's race and how they typically vote. So therefore it's ideologically motivated. It's about how we're governed. But because there's a correlation between how we vote and people's race, then obviously, as soon as you start making it about how you're governed, somebody can come along and say, well, hold on a second, you've got, so for example, in our last polling, about 80% of coloured voters supported Cape independence, just under 70% of white voters, and only about 30% of black voters. So we had this very distinct difference between races, and I think that's natural, given that if you would just take it to its simplest form, DA voters are likely to want to support Cape independence because in an independent Western Cape, the DA will be the national government and not the ANC, whereas ANC voters are not going to like Cape independence because the ANC is the national government now, even though the people of the Western Cape didn't vote for it. But in Cape independence, it would no longer be the national government. So, but absolutely, look, I'm strongly non-racial. Our movement is strongly non-racial, and we're advocating for Cape independence for all the people of the Western Cape, regardless of race, religion, and culture. But you're quite right. I'm often accused of being racist.
Okay, so about detaching from the rest of the South African nation, have you thought of the influence or impact it would have on the rest of South Africa, should this independence take place? I mean, you are aware that the Western Cape contributes quite a lot economically towards the GDP of the South African nation. So, aren't you worried about that or concerned about that as well? Or you just moving with, okay, no, we're worried about the Western Cape. We just attend to the Western Cape.
Well, I think it's almost the opposite, and I think this is one of the things, and I think it's one of the issues that comes into race. And I think this is a great conversation to have. I immediately see I'm in the room with the right guy because you're open-minded and we can have it. And I think this is a conversation in many ways that's long overdue, as opposed to typically you go onto Twitter and it's kind of Cape independence supporters on the left, yes. Township dwellers on the right, shouting at each other across Twitter, which solves nothing. So we have to kind of take this back a step, and it goes back to the right of self-determination, which is that all people have this right to be governed according to their own will. In other words, you and I will come from different areas, will come from different cultural backgrounds. We're going to have different values, and that neither one of ours is right or wrong. But if we fundamentally disagree, and for argument's sake, you believe in same-sex marriage and I vehemently disagree with it, and that's a real point for us, then actually we should be able to find a way that governs us, that allows us both to have our space in the sun. So what you've got in South Africa, you've got this situation where 8 provinces habitually vote for the ANC and are governed according to their democratic will. And the 9th province, the Western Cape, the majority of people in the Western Cape have never once voted for the ANC. We hate the ANC. We don't want to be governed by the ANC. And therefore, it's not really about, and I think one of the problems that tends to happen, and I think, we've got to be careful that racism can come, often racism is subliminal and unconscious, and it can come from both sides. And one of the things that you often find is that people in the rest of South Africa kind of almost, it comes from African nationalism. Actually, that part of South Africa is really ours too. And that's where we got this challenge. So people kind of say, well, hang on a second, I'm in Limpopo, but you can't secede in the Western Cape. That's ours. That person might never have set foot in the Western Cape. They've got no historical ties whatsoever to the Western Cape. But actually, by virtue of the black that they could, by the virtue that they're African, and normally by virtue of the fact that they're black, they are then assuming that they have more rights than the people in the Western Cape. And I think that's so. Therefore, you can look at that both ways. So we're not wanting to deny anybody in the rest of South Africa anything. We're wanting to chart our own path according to the democratic will of the people that live here. And if the consequence of that it has a implication on the rest of South Africa, then so be it. We have to work out how do we manage that. But you can't deny us our right of self-determination. Not you, you're part of us because you're in the Western Cape, but people outside of the Western Cape can't deny us our right to self-determination based on the fact that it might be inconvenient to them, because the whole point of self-determination is it's about self. It's about what the people of the Western Cape want, not about what the rest of South Africa wants.
Okay. So do you think this will ever happen?
Absolutely think it'll happen. I think it's inevitable. I think South Africa will break up. Now, whether Cape Independence is the first domino to fall, or the second or the fifth, I don't know. At this point in time, if we look at what South Africa is, people forget that South Africa is a country that's only 114 years old. And for all of that 114 years, somebody has been taken advantage of. First of all, we had British colonialism, and obviously the British governed for their benefit, and everybody apart from the sort of the British community suffered. Then we had Afrikaner nationalism, and everybody effectively apart from Afrikaners suffered, although obviously white people still benefited even if there weren't Afrikaners in that system. And now under the ANC, pretty well anybody who's not an ANC politician suffers. But the entire history of South Africa is somebody sitting in Pretoria making decisions which have been really bad news for a certain section of the population. And South Africa just isn't a viable construct. It was an agreement made by the British and the Boers to force together all of these people into this unnatural system, which is going to break apart. Now, whether Cape Independence goes first, whether it's Zulu nationalism, whether it's Afrikaner nationalism, or something else that we don't know, whether it's that Julius Malema finally gets to try and implement expropriation without compensation, and that leads to violence in the rest of South Africa. Who knows what will be the catalyst? But ultimately, South Africa will not last another 30 or 40 years. And I think Cape Independence is probably the most advanced of the breakaway movements, and I think probably is likely to happen within the next 10 years at the longest, perhaps even shorter.
Okay. So is this movement registered for elections?
Yes, yeah. We're on all three ballots: the national ballot, the regional ballot, and the provincial ballot.
Oh, so you're also contesting for national?
Yes, we are.
But like, you yet seeking independence in the Western Cape.
Sure, and there are two reasons for that. The first one really is just the way that the South African system of government works. So the African system of government is what's called quasi-federal. So you have this national parliament which has pretty well all of the power, and then you have provinces which really have very, very little power. They can control a few things, but almost all the major decisions are held at national level. So for argument's sake, one of the things that we want to do at national level is we want to table a change of the constitution, which would allow citizens to instigate referendums and not just premiers. Now, we can only do that at a national level. The national parliament is not so critical to us, but there are a lot of Cape Independence supporters who live outside of the Western Cape, because Cape Independence is ideologically driven. And there's a lot of people who look and say, well, look, we don't associate with the values that are in present day South Africa, but actually we agree with the values that the Western Cape is aspiring to, and long term, we'd love to have an independent Western Cape because we'd love to actually end up going to live there.
Let's say now you make it nationally, Yeah. So like, why detach the Western Cape if like you run the whole country?
Well, we're never going to run the national. We're never going to. At best, we're a very small single-issue party. At best, we're going to get a seat or two in the national parliament and a seat or two in the provincial parliament. So our role is to influence the big parties, not to replace them. And in fact, we've promised people in the Western Cape that we'll vote with the DA to allow the DA to remain in power in the Western Cape. We're not trying to take control of power. We're just trying to force the DA to call a referendum on Cape independence. And realistically, you've got this. You've got two schools of thought in South Africa. Let me call them I would describe them as the non-racialists and the African nationalists. You've got one group of people who broadly believe in a more market-orientated economy. They believe that South Africa genuinely belongs to everybody, regardless of their race, and they are they would be the parties. That would be the DA, Action SA, and the Freedom Front Plus, and ourselves. And then on the other side, you've got African nationalist parties who fundamentally really don't believe in non-racialism. They believe that Africa belongs to Africans, and that is the ANC and the EFF and MK. So you have these two schools of thought, and ultimately, South Africa's that's a divide that's very, very difficult for South Africa to bridge, and it's a divide that falls closely, not completely, very closely in line with the Western Cape. So, in the Western Cape, the non-racialists are in a majority, and we want to stay that way. And in the rest of South Africa, the African nationalists are in a majority. So, and that's not going to change. We just want to recognize that and create a place in the sun for the non-racialists.
Oh, so like the referendum party is actually with the DA in a way.
Well, so yes, to a certain extent. In other words, every small party, let's skip ahead. There's 42 seats in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, and to run the province, you need to get 50% or more. So you need 21 or 22 of those 42 seats. And once the elections are over, people will take up their seats. Let's imagine we have 2 seats. That's our target. Then the Western Cape will elect the premier, and you'll have to decide. In reality, that's going to be between the DA or the ANC. And given a choice between the DA or the ANC, we absolutely will choose the DA every single time, because the ANC have been a terrible government and are responsible for most of the problems that South Africa is currently facing, accepting that they weren't responsible for the legacy issues that they've been here for 30 years, and they're making things worse rather than better.
Do you think 30 years is enough, though, to kind of fix some of the damages?
Absolutely, it's more than enough. You can fix them in a decade. I can't say you can fix everything, and the bottom line is South Africa's just making the ANC is making them worse and not better. And I think we've got to be super careful. I have personally, and I'll happily do it again now. I recognize the evils of apartheid. I've repeatedly, personally apologized for any part I may have played in either doing anything or not doing enough to stop it. But actually, we can't use that as an excuse for forever to not solve our problems. Our problems are in the here and now. Why are people living in poverty and in terrible conditions? Because ultimately we're not creating enough economic growth, because we've got terrible business policies. We're not creating jobs. We've got an education system that's a joke. So we're turning out people who are barely literate, not properly qualified, and so therefore they struggle to do certain jobs. And then on the other hand, we've got an economy that's growing so slowly there aren't any jobs for people to take up, and the result is we have this terrible unemployment, actually about 42% or whatever it now is. And in the Western Cape, because the DA have governed and tried to do their best, it's much lower in the Western Cape. It's around 26%, but 26% is still absolutely terrible. That means 1 in 4 people in the Western Cape are unemployed, and that's an absolute disgrace. And that's what we have to fix. And it doesn't help to look back and say, well, hold on a second, wasn't Hendrik Verwoerd a terrible person? The answer is, well, what has Cyril Ramaphosa done to fix those issues? What did Jacob Zuma do to fix those issues? And they've made them worse. And ironically, we can look back at the ANC's own history. I came to South Africa in 2004, and at that point, the ANC was doing pretty well. We had high economic growth, our unemployment was right down. So the ANC started well, and then it took a lurch to the left, and it started pursuing economic policies, and suddenly everything it started to improve went backwards, and now in many cases we're back worse than we were in 1994. So absolutely, we can expect the ANC to have fixed that. They fixed a large part of it in the first 10 years before they went off the rails.
So on the 20th of March, you posted Cape Independence is not hard to understand if you apply objective thought and rational reason. Um, could you explain that? And also, you were responding to a text when someone said, I'm trying to understand. Now I'm quoting. Someone said, I'm trying to understand this guy. He migrated to SA recently, talking generations, yet he wished to establish his own little British economy. I mean, British colony. Can someone tell him and his vote referendum that it's not an option for SA? Personally, I would prefer independence for SA for all.
Sure.
So, like, could you explain that?
Sure. So look, so I think there are two different aspects there. So first of all, let's deal with me and my Britishness, because I don't hide from that at all. You know, in the day, and you know, there's the old saying, don't shoot the messenger. I'm simply the messenger. In the day, what are we campaigning for? We're campaigning. There's 3.2 million voters in the Western Cape. We're campaigning for a referendum where we ask all 3.2 million people what they want, and I'll have one vote. So I simply happen to be the person who has become the face of or one of, but probably the primary face of the movement, and therefore, you know, I obviously attract a huge amount of criticism. And because I couldn't care less what people call me, it makes it very easy for me to stand here because I can just laugh it off. People can say what they like. You know, I'm bringing a message. I'm going to make my argument. I'm not going to be bullied into silence. So therefore, you know, let people shoot the messenger if they want. But the reality is, it's the idea you're supposed to think. If you're attacking the person who's saying the words rather than the idea, you're engaging with the wrong thing. Make an argument if people oppose Cape Independence that why Cape Independence is a bad idea. Don't attack the person who happens to be saying the words. You know, play the ball and not the man in soccer parlances. When it comes to and what was the first part of your question? Was, oh yeah, logically. Well, it's completely logical. So let's imagine that what's our system of government? We're in a democracy. So a democracy is about making sure that people club together, and in a group of people, they vote for what they want, and that's what they get. And here in the Western Cape, the majority of people have never once, it's a statistical fact, for 30 years, since 1994, the majority of Western Cape voters have never once voted for the ANC. But we've never been governed by anybody else. It's been a complete disaster. So wanting to escape a system where it doesn't matter who you vote for, you always get the government you voted against. Why would any sane person want to remain in that system? It's completely logical to say, well, this system just doesn't work for us. If the other 8 provinces want to keep on electing the ANC or the EFF or MK, then let them. That's their choice. That's how democracy works. But if here in the Western Cape we never get what we want, why would we stay in that system? And actually, I mean, that is the easiest thing in the world to understand. And actually, when people don't understand it, it's not that they don't understand it, it's that they don't like it. And often they need to look in their own souls. They need to look in the mirror and say, well, actually, why is it that I am so offended by the people of the Western Cape wanting to hold a referendum in accordance with the Constitution to find out what the majority of people want? Why would I find that offensive? And the answer normally is nothing to do with me. It's to do with them and their own issues. And one of the issues that we've got in South Africa is you know, I've said this before, and I get it's an offensive thing, but it's true. Black racism is a massive problem in South Africa. And why it's a massive problem is this: as a white person, if I say something racist, everybody will leap on me. And so they should, because I have no right to be racist. But if I'm a black person and I say something racist, hardly anybody says anything. And it's socially acceptable in South Africa to be black and racist, where it's socially unacceptable to be white and racist. So what happens often, the people who are screaming the loudest at being a racist have never worked out that they're actually the racists. All I want, and the people around me in our party, is for a referendum to be called in accordance with the Constitution. And actually, the people on the other side are going, hey, but he's white. He's got a British accent. He can't have that. You know, go home, piss off back to Britain. Yeah. And actually, who's being racist? I'm asking, when I say a referendum, that's not for me to decide. It's for white people. It's for coloured people. It's for black people. When we wrote the Western Cape People's Bill, which I wrote, we said the Western Cape has got 3 official languages. Who are the Western people? Western Cape people. They speak Afrikaans. They speak English. They speak isiXhosa. And that's on record. that I have no issues. It's not my racism that's the issue. It's the people who don't like Cape Independence and can't find a logical argument against it. And actually, they need to look at their souls and examine exactly what it is about Cape Independence that so offends them.
So you mentioned something about like the 8 provinces that keep on voting for the ANC, and yet they see some of the matters you raised, which the ANC are doing, which are wrong. So like, why do you think is it that the people of those 8 provinces keep on voting for the same political parties that are doing the wrong that you have mentioned?
I think, and I think there are a number of reasons for that, and I think you can look at them a very, very simplistically, and you can look at them very, very complex. But I mean, somebody said, and it's a tragic truth. I wished it wasn't the case, but there was a tweet on Twitter that said, "Here we are, 2024. Once every 5 years, we have a race census called an election." And actually, it's not far wrong. In South Africa, ironically, the only ethnic group who vote across racial lines is the coloured people of the Western Cape. Black people vote for black parties. White people predominantly vote for white parties. And actually, so why do we have that? I'm angry with the DA because they've broken their word on a referendum on Cape Independence, and they're denying democracy to the Western Cape people. So I'm a great fan of the DA. But actually, if you look at objective fact, if you took a piece of paper and you wrote down and said, well, which of these parties, the DA or the ANC, has done the best job for the last 20 years, and you could look at unemployment, you could look at clean governance, you could look at building schools, you could look at anything you like, the DA would come out ahead of the DA, ahead of the ANC by any objective measure. But actually, the majority of black voters in South Africa will vote for the ANC anyway. Why? Because they say the DA is a white party. And why is that? That is exactly the issue. It's this subliminal, subconscious black racism. They won't vote for the party that's best simply because of the race of the leader, and that's the issue. Now, I get there's hurt from the past. There are all sorts of issues, and I can't possibly put myself in somebody's shoes who's been that, and I won't try to. But actually, you ask me why that, I don't know, but that clearly is a factor, and you know as well as I do that is an uncomfortable truth in South Africa, that people just won't vote for the best party, they because they have an issue with the race of the leader.
Wow. So like, how do you think we could fix that and like I would make that awareness of black racism besides, if going the route of the Cape Independence and all of that?
Well, look, I think I think like anything else. So human beings are inherently good. And we're all the same. I have to say, we might have different cultures, but you and I are just the same people. If we end up in a bar and drink a beer, we're going to find within 10 minutes that we have interest in sport, we have interest in this, we have interest in our children. So fundamentally, we're not different people. But obviously, we've grown up in different environments. And ultimately, one of the first things and one of the things that we've consciously done. So I know I often say things that are offensive, and I don't say them by accident. When I first chose to say there's an issue with black racism, I said it knowing it was going to upset people, but actually knowing that we need to upset people. We need to get these things talked about so that by talking about, people become aware. And then actually what eventually will happen will people within their own communities, within, people within the Kayamandi community, and someone's, what's going to happen when you watch this video, 90% of people are going to say that white bastard, that racist pig, but actually 10% are going to say, but you know what? He's right. He's got a point. We do always vote for the ANC or the EFF. And that's where it starts. It isn't going to start from someone like me. Me or anybody else might be the catalyst to kind of put that thought there, because it's an uncomfortable thought. But then it grows, and you see that with Cape Independence. A lot of people start off with this is a terrible idea, and then ultimately, they start to sort of come around, and lots of things are very different. When we collected signatures we had to collect signatures this year to get on the ballot. People will never believe this, but do you know where we collected the most physical signatures?
Wow, where?
Khayelitsha. We got more physical signatures in Khayelitsha than in anywhere else. I tell you the truth. Now, but that perhaps is because, we clearly haven't got most of our supporters in Khayelitsha, but what we have got is, some of it's collected online, digitally, and so on. We've got a Khayelitsha branch. We've got a guy in Kailicha who's just brilliant, Luyolo. We've got I've got another guy who's been my right-hand man on many issues. Lua Barlow's a causa guy. We have got a multiracial team. People will never believe it, and it's fine, but they don't need to believe it, because actually what happens is there's always one or two people that step up. And ironically, both Luyolo and Lua Barlow are far more right-wing than me. I'm quite left-wing, ironically. Yeah, if you talk to Lua Barlow, he'll say, well, hold on a second, I'm causa. I'm actually a causa nationalist, and I believe the causa people are better off throwing their lot in with the coloured people and the white people than with the other black tribes of South Africa, because actually we'll create a better future for the causa people. So but that's just, whether he's right or wrong, that's just thought processes that are really, really important, that people start to develop that within their own communities, and we start the conversation, and then we'll end up at a good place in the end.
Okay, so like, what are some of the critics that you get as a party besides the racial, critics and all of that? I mean, like, besides the black parties, I mean, like, there are other parties also, such as Good Party, who did share their critics on you guys, and like, what are some of the critics that you get besides the racial part?
No. So look, yeah, absolutely, and look, right. Look, we mustn't just dwell on racism. We got to move past that. So I thank you for that. And look, broadly speaking, our most people, not all, because Cape Independence is a broad church. In other words, we want to be able to make our own decisions. It doesn't mean we necessarily agree on what decisions we would then make. So you will have, so for example, the Cape Coloured Congress is a very far left political party, but they support Cape independence. But broadly, the Western Cape independence movement would be centre-right. So what you'll find is that we will have sympathy from all of the centre-right parties. So whilst the DA are opposed to Cape independence, they're not that opposed to Cape independence. Their voters like Cape independence, and privately, if you got them in a room after a few drinks, you'd find out that an awful lot of them are quite keen on the idea. And the Freedom Front Plus are clearly support Cape independence, whereas parties from the political left are obviously very opposed. And that's because genuinely people on the political right like decentralization. They want to have power closer to the people. And parties from the political left want to consolidate power in national government. So the ANC wants national industries. It wants as much power in the central government. The EFF takes it even further. It wants to privatize all land. It wants everything held in the center. So parties who want everything held in the center are going to hate a movement that says, let's take power closer to the people. Whereas parties from the political right who say, well, let's have power closer to the people, even if they don't support Cape independence, are going to be much more sympathetic to. So you find parties saying, well, look, we don't support Cape independence, but we would love to have federalism, or we'd love to. And as you say, that transcends, so the IFP is a party that openly supports federalism.
Wow.
The ACDP supports federalism. So people mustn't think that this spectrum is race. It's about political beliefs, and where do you want to have your do you believe in bringing power closer to the people, or do you believe in centralizing power in the state? And that's the classic case of effectively of socialism, communism, which is about the state knows best, and free market capitalism, which is actually the people know best.
Okay, so like, how are people receiving the Cape independence, especially Black communities? I know you mentioned Kailicha, and like, besides Kailicha and like, but most Black communities in the Western Cape.
Well, look, support is lowest amongst Black voters, and that was always going to be the case, and that always is going to be the case because as we said at the start, Black communities are predominantly voting ANC or EFF, and therefore Cape independence is if you look in 2021, the ANC got 20% of the vote. If you're an ANC voter, well, it's great. You got 20% of the vote, and you get the national government. That's brilliant. And actually the party that got 55% of the vote doesn't get to make the decisions. So of course, if you're part of the 20%, you're not going to like the idea of losing that power. And if you're part of the 55%, you're going to think, well, that's really unfair. We'd like to have that. That's exactly what you see. But I mean, we have substantial support amongst the Black community, but I would say amongst people who would come from the political right. In other words, people who've kind of broken out of of the traditional way of thinking, and increasingly saying, well, hold on a second, this system's just not working for us. Look at how we're living. Look at how poor we are. Look at how few jobs we've got. Doing more of the same isn't going to work. And I think, you know, so of course it's a challenge, and most of our voters are not going to come from black communities. I accept that. It doesn't mean that we don't care about black communities and want to act in their best interest.
Do you perhaps have a manifesto?
So the manifesto has not been launched yet. That'll be done soon. But our manifesto is very, very simple. It's only got 3 things on it. You know, what are we going to do? Number one, we believe that Cape Independence will offer the best future for the people of the Western Cape. Number 2 is that given the choice between the DA and the ANC, for now, the DA is the best party to govern the Western Cape. And then number 3, but then the DA must call a referendum on Cape Independence and allow the people of the province to choose for themselves. So there are 3 issues, and it's no more complicated than that. We're a single issue party. We just want a referendum to be held to allow the people to decide for themselves.
Okay. So any final words for our people watching? You know, just your final words, anything.
No, look, I would say, look, just think for yourselves. Have the courage to not listen. You're going to hear lots of noise. Hopefully you and I have spoken now. People will get a sense that I'm not the big bad wolf. I'm not this vile person that they've probably heard that I am. Maybe some will still think I am, but that's fine. But actually think for yourself and understand that, you know, part of political discourse is to have these different discussions. And doing what we're doing now has a disaster. You know, you're in a community where probably 50 or 60% have fled ANC rule. They've left the Eastern Cape. They've come to the Western Cape. What is it you're running away from? And then when you get here, why do you want to turn what you've arrived into what you ran away from? You voted for the ANC and it was shit. You're now here. Why vote for the ANC or the EFF? You just and actually, what is the biggest issue of other people in the Western Cape with migrant communities? Our biggest frustration. We're not anti-black. We don't mind you guys. We want everybody to have their place in the sun. What's our biggest fear of black migrants from the Eastern Cape? That you're going to ruin our piece of paradise. We want you to share it with us. We want you to take hands and help us build a country where we all prosper. But actually, what our biggest fear is that you're going to come here, you're going to vote for the ANC, and you're going to make the Western Cape look like the Eastern Cape that you ran away from in the first place. And there's a challenge for people. Vote better. You know, it doesn't have to be for us. Let's make good decisions so that all of our families can grow up with jobs, with houses, and in a peaceful, lovely part of the world.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Good luck on your journey. And yes, thank you for joining us once more. Highly appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for your time. It was great. I appreciated it. Thanks, Yoli.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
You too.